Hello everyone and welcome to Real Life NPCs. I'm Jackie, and this is a little series we like to call NPCs Running D&D. Throughout this series, I'm going to take you through all sorts of tutorials and tips for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Today, we're going to be covering something pretty simple, but incredibly important: dice. Now, if you're an experienced player, you probably already know how all the dice in D&D work, but when you start out, the sheer number and types of dice can be a bit overwhelming. So, I want to take some time today to explain how you read each dice and what they're often used for. Now, more than just D&D uses a standard set of 7 tabletop RPG dice, so you can find them sold in a lot of places, and usually the sets will work for whatever you need. Let's start with our smallest dice and work our way up. This little pyramid is called the D4. Our group also tends to call them caltrops, as you can see by the shape and pointiness. Usually this is used for weapon attacks, like a dagger or a club, or the damage for some low-level spells. As you may have already guessed, a dice is named after the number of sides it has, and the highest number on the dice. So, for a D4, we have 4 sides, and the highest number we can roll on it is a 4. There are a couple different kinds of D4s that I have seen. The most common is when you roll and read whatever number is on top, so in this case a 2. There's another kind where the numbers are actually printed down here on the bottom, the flat side, and you read whatever's facing up in that case. Sadly, I don't have any of those D4s handy. So, next up, we have the D6. Now, I know what you're saying. Jackie, this is just a normal dice you see in pretty much any board game, and you'd be right, except in this case, the numbers are actually printed instead of those dots. For some reason, though, when our group started off playing D&D, D6s were the hardest ones for us to remember, because we were so used to seeing them in other places. Regardless, D6s are used for the health dice of wizards, sorcerers, and many types of weapon damage like short swords and quarterstaffs. Reading these are easy. You just roll and read whatever number is on the top. So in this case, I rolled a 5. Not too bad. Next up, we have the D8. This, I always think, kind of looks like a double pyramid, or basically 2 D4s that have been stuck together. D8s are often used for weapon damage rolls, things like a flail, a longsword, and a couple other ones. It's also used as the health dice for classes like a bard or a rogue. Rolling D8, pretty simple, as with the others. You roll the dice, you roll, and read what is on top. So in this case, of course, we rolled a 7. Next up, the D10. This one is slightly more complicated, so just stick with me. It looks a little like, kind of like this top thing, and you will probably notice that there are 2 of them. Let's move our other eyes back there. So, we'll cover why there's 2 in just a second. Let's start with the single-digit D10 that looks like this. This can be used for weapon damage like glaives and heavy crossbows, for example. Fighters and rangers both use this for their health rolls. Now, if you roll a 0 on a D10, which you will notice here, don't fret, the 0 represents a 10, since it's the max for the dice. So of course, in this one, you roll whatever's on top, so we rolled a 2. Not our best roll so far. Now, if you happen to roll the double digit, you pretty much just take the top number. If you were to happen to roll a 0, there it is. That would also still count as your 10. Personally, I would recommend, however, using the single-digit D10 for your weapon, just so you don't get confused. Now, why do we have 2 of these in our set of 7 dice? That's because 2 D10s can be rolled together for something called a D100 roll. So sometimes your DM will ask you to roll a D100 when you're rolling from loot, maybe from a loot table, or if you're a sorcerer and you have wild magic, things like that. Whenever it happens, you roll both together, as I just did. The double digit becomes your tens place, and the single digit becomes your ones place. So, in this case, I rolled an 86. We can do it again. That's actually a good example right there, because this is a 10, because I rolled a 1 and a 0 for my ones place, so we have a 10. For example, a little more complicated ones, if we were to roll, where is it? This would be a 1, and this here would be a 100. Kind of max out the dice. Because the tables don't have a 0 place, you roll them 1 to 100. It sounds kind of confusing, I know. This one really just takes some practice using them in game, but you're eventually going to nail it down. Alright, next up, we have the D12. This basically looks like the D20's younger brother. Similar kind of shape and everything, just less sides, obviously. We only go to 12. This is used for major weapon damage, like a great axe or a lance, something big. It's also the health dice for Barbarian, the only class that has such a high hit dice. That would not be a very good hit dice roll there with a 3, but it happens sometimes. Finally, the star of the show, our D20. This is probably the dice you are going to use the most while playing D&D, because it's what you use to attack, make skill checks, saving throws, initiative, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Rolling a D20 is simple, as is all the others. You roll, and whatever on top, so you roll 17, pretty good. Now, the D20 is important because it also has a special effect when you roll either a 1 or a 20 on the dice. A 20 is called a critical success. A 1 is called a critical failure. If you roll a 20 when you attack, you get to add critical damage and roll extra damage dice to deal more to your target. If you roll a 1, however, that usually causes something less favorable to happen. That's also up to your DM's discretion, however. Every DM has rules and kind of their own way of doing the severity of a critical success and a critical failure. It all just is kind of up to your dungeon master, so that's going to vary. So, one quick thing before we finish up. Sometimes you'll see a weapon, like a great sword, for example. Let me dig around here. We'll say it requires 2d6 damage. Now you're probably thinking, why not just roll 1d12? Well, technically it makes it to where your minimum damage you can roll is only a 2 instead of a 1. I'm sure there's some other balancing issues in there that I don't know about, and I'm not going to pretend to know about. But when you see something like that, you roll 2 6s instead of 1, and we did really badly on this roll. We only rolled 3 on our 2d6. Spells are also usually going to denote rolling more than just 1 dice, especially at higher levels. I have some spells as a wizard that do things like 8d8 damage, and you bet it, that means you're going to dig out 8 of these little guys, if you have 8, or roll it 8 times, or of course, there are always online dice rollers for when you do not want to roll the little things yourselves, especially on some high damage rolls. It gets a little tedious at times. It is just really important in that case to look, if you have something that says 2d6 or 8d8 or 4d6, make sure you're looking at that first number to denote how many of these little guys you're going to roll. And honestly, that's about it for dice. We'll cover more uses as we move forward, but those are the basics of the dice themselves. So thank you for joining me in this episode of NPCs Running D&D. If you have any suggestions about what D&D tutorials you would like to see next, leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, everybody. Let's see what we get. Oh, a 19. Not too bad. It's going to be a good day. Thanks for watching.